So we looked at the national players and we said, okay, what's their top two costs? Their top two costs are shipping and packaging because they centralize and they have to ship across the nation. And their number one problem is the freshness of the product. Well, people are buying this product because they believe it's the freshest product. So we knew we could beat them out on the distribution side, right? But we couldn't scale fast. So rightfully so, the national players, they could scale very fast doing that. And that's what technology people want, right? But now you're seeing all the problems that are coming about it. Because of the spoiled product, not being able to control freshness across 2 to 3 days to the consumer's home, people are leaving.
The startup investment landscape is changing, and world-class companies are being built outside of Silicon Valley. We find them, talk with them, and discuss the upside of investing in them. Welcome to Upside. Woo!
Hello. Welcome to the Upside Podcast, the first podcast finding upside outside of Silicon Valley. I'm Eric Hornung, and I'm accompanied by my co-host, Mr. Ventura, California himself, Jay Klaus. Jay, how's it going, man?
Well, Ohio is a lot more humid than California was. Big fan of California weather, I'll be honest. I know this is a show about being outside of Silicon Valley, but being out there on the coast, the weather's nice. It's chill out there. I understand the appeal, but happy to be back here in Ohio after a short trip to the coast.
Is your car as nice as the Charger that they gave you out there?
So getting back and driving my Ford Fusion. So sorry, a little bit of inside baseball. Was out in California this past week recording a course for LinkedIn Learning. They acquired lynda.com a few years ago, and I'm an author on their course software. When I go out there, they give me a rental car and a hotel. They did not have a mid-size vehicle for me this week, and so I got a free upgrade to a Dodge Charger, which was amazing to cruise around Highway 101. And no, my car, it does not at all compare to that. Getting back in my car, I just didn't recognize the feel of the pedals. I thought something was wrong, and then I remembered, oh no, I'm just driving a much worse vehicle.
Well, I'm glad you had some fun out there. I'm glad you got to geographically diversify a bit, which is something we've talked about a little bit lately. But now we're here. We're at Upside. So, Jay, what are we doing here?
Here at Upside, we're talking to founders outside of Silicon Valley. We think it's a great time to be a founder outside of Silicon Valley. And every week here, we're talking to somebody new who helps reaffirm that belief. So we talk to founders. This is a mechanism for Eric and I to learn and think like angel investors, which we are really, really enjoying. But we believe that the economics are great to be a founder outside of Silicon Valley, that the founders are smart, opportunity seeking, capital efficient, and very resilient. And so every week we talk to one of them. This week we're talking to Frank Jackman, the co-founder and CEO of localized. localized is a food and beverage delivery service. It's a boxed meal kit service, much akin to a Blue Apron or a HelloFresh, using locally sourced ingredients. It was founded in 2015, based in St. Paul, Minnesota. It was part of the Techstars retail accelerator, much the way that Upsy and Vibe were. It's raised $1.6 million in funding to this point from Matchstick Ventures, Router Ventures, M25, and some others. I got a lot of research statistics here, Eric, but would like to turn it over to you and hear your first impressions researching localized.
Yeah, so what we're going to do here is do a little bit of research on the upfront. Then we're going to dive into the interview with the founder and do a deal memo later. Jay has a ton of research. I have done probably not as much as him. He's been up since 5 a.m. doing research, apparently, on this company. So my first thoughts, my first take when I looked at localized is, oh, another one. And I know that's probably not the most exciting response, but the idea of a subscription box, which is my understanding of what localized is, I feel like I see them everywhere all the time. And I know that the financials behind them are very attractive to a lot of investors everywhere around the United States. But it just feels like, oh, another one to me. Jay, did you have a similar feeling or something different?
Maybe not as intensely, but yes, subscription boxes definitely had their time in the sun a few years ago, and most subscription boxes kind of fell by the wayside, leaving way to things still like BarkBox and I think Birchbox. The meal prep kits are the ones that seem to have endured the most, because I think a lot of people realized after some time passed, I don't need all this stuff, and I'm getting a monthly package of stuff. And the thing was about that, a lot of that stuff wasn't consumable. And so you're just piling up stuff. Meal kits, naturally consumable. You're going to be eating anyway. So this is a little bit of a different model. Found some quick stats on the market size and the kind of the landscape as it stands. This came from a Recode article in March of 2018. $5 billion market in America. American meal kit market, about $5 billion. Blue Apron, as of this year, is sitting at about 35% of that market, which is down from 46% of the meal kit market in February 2017. HelloFresh acquired something called Green Chef recently, and combined, they own 36% of the market. So they've eclipsed Blue Apron this year, and their sales grew 5 times faster than Blue Apron over the last year. U.S. meal kit sales grew 41% in 2017, so it seems that that market size may be increasing for a meal kit versus, your traditional cooking at home or I guess going out to eat. But neither company, HelloFresh or Blue Apron, is profitable at this point.
Right. And I've read a couple case studies on some of those companies. And it seems like, and this is a question we're going to have to dig into, the cost to acquire a new user or a new subscriber is extremely high in this industry, in this space. And that's kind of been the downfall of a lot of these. It's acquire, and then hope they stick. And if they don't stick, then you've spent $90 to acquire this person who you're expecting to have a lifetime value of $180, but they end up having a value of $25, right? And it's that those kind of assumptions are very big going forward into how much you're going to spend to acquire a subscriber.
And in a space that is increasingly competitive, with HelloFresh and Blue Apron both being public companies, they have a lot more resources at their disposal to do so. Eric, by the way, got to cut in here and say, being up since 6 a.m., I acquired some Alpha Brain from Onnit yesterday, and I am trying that for the first time right now, and I am feeling on fire. So Onnit, if you're looking to sponsor another podcast, I know Joe Rogan is probably got a few more listeners than us. Starting to feel the magic here.
Wow. What a pitch in the middle of our...
On fire. So something else that I wanted to say about this opportunity in particular, in my research, started to tease out that meal kits, while traditionally delivered as a subscription box, there has been increased interest in retailers, big box retailers, and offering them in the retail stores, which I think is part of the reason why Local Crate went through the Target accelerator. Blue Apron is testing in Costco. I believe Walmart is rolling out their own meal kits. Albertsons, which we talked about as a big chain in the Script Drop episode, they acquired Plated recently. So it seems like that is going to be a major part of the Local Crate strategy. Did you see anything about that or anything else that kind of got your attention?
Yeah, and Kroger, I think, recently bought Home Chef, if I'm not mistaken, which is a pseudo meal kit thing. But there is this kind of trend that the meal kit industry is rapidly consolidating. That's actually the title of one of the articles that I read on Forbes. It's interesting, and I'll be interested to hear a little bit more from Frank on how exactly they see themselves playing as a newcomer into an industry that is kind of developed over the last maybe 5 to 7 years. One thing that I think is incredibly interesting will be how they're going to work with fixed costs. So on a project that I was working on for my full-time job, I was in Kearney, New Jersey, which is somewhere I don't recommend anyone go. And across the street from the place where I was standing was this huge building, just absolutely massive. It was for Blue Apron. And I thought, wow, that's crazy. I didn't even think about the back end of this. There's these massive manufacturing centers. So what does the scalability look like of this? How do they have to go about scaling? Is this going to be, okay, get really, really big, then get profitable? We'll acquire a ton of subscribers. We will build out all of this infrastructure, then get profitable? Or is there a different business model with Local Crate? And that's what I'm excited to hear about.
Great question. Logistics seems like it will be challenging, as hot as locally sourced farm to table type ideas are right now, which is part of the Local Crate value proposition. I have to think that makes logistics much more difficult because they offer same or next day delivery from getting the ingredients. Interested to hear how that process works. I did some quick research on their serving prices versus HelloFresh and Blue Apron. HelloFresh and Blue Apron seem to be pricing it at the same, about $9.99 per serving. Local Crate is at $13.50 or at best $12 for a larger order. So in a battle of acquire, it seems like they have some challenges ahead, and I'm interested to hear from Frank how they plan to tackle them and what they see as their opportunity in the market.
Let's do it. Let's jump into the interview and let's figure out what's different about Local Crate.
Frank, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Excited to get going here.
Excited to have you on. So we like to start with the history of the founder. So can you kind of tell us about the history of Frank? What's that look like?
Yeah, history of Frank. Well, first we had two co-founders, myself and Mike. Mike's unable to join us today, but myself, originally born in Southern California, moved out to the Midwest or Minnesota when I was about 12 years old. Small town, about 400 people. Moved to another town, about 1,200 people. Grew up right, kind of the major city next to us was Marshall, Minnesota, which no one still knows, and then Minneapolis, if you will. So we're about 3 hours away from Minneapolis. So heartland of the country, farming, concrete, construction work was basically all there was. So school, sports, and concrete and construction work, working on the farms.
Is that what your parents did out there?
Yeah, my dad was in construction, and my mom was actually in nursing. So taking care of people or building things.
How did you get from Tyler to? I'm guessing. Where'd you go to school?
Yeah.
How'd that progress?
One of the big companies in Marshall, Minnesota, or the big company that built that area is Schwann's, the Schwann Food Company. A lot of people kind of know them for their home delivery trucks. That's actually a small piece of their business. The bigger pieces are their retail products. So they own brands like Totino's, Fruschetta, Red Baron, Mrs. Smith's Pies. They're a huge producer of frozen foods. So my mom worked there too a little bit at times. So that'll come back. But after high school there, went to college in Mankato, Minnesota, which is about an hour and a half closer to the cities. And MSU, just a state college. Had fun at college. Still miss college. Met a lot of great friends, a lot of great advisors. And one of the things that kind of led me into entrepreneurship is now who is the dean of the business school was an entrepreneurial teacher. And she launched this project where it was an entrepreneurial class. It was the first class we had in college. And you literally got to go in there and try to figure out how to create a business. And it was just a meet once a week type of thing. And the very first thing we did, I think it was freshman or sophomore, is that I don't know if I really told people about this, is there was very simple, but it was homecoming, right? And everybody was making their own t-shirts for homecoming. It's like, well, why don't we sell people t-shirts? So that's what we did. We created t-shirts and then we donated all the proceeds to United Way. Yeah, United Way.
What did the t-shirts say on them?
I can't remember. There was about 5 or 6, and the one that I remember, because my girlfriend at the time, wife at the time, still has one, it said like 2000, can't remember what year it was, 2000 something, 13, whatever. And the circle had, so it was like a peace themed one. And the circle had like a peace sign. And then the other one was like a flower and it was pink, type of thing. We couldn't do anything outrageous in the sense we wanted to, right? Like during that time, our mayor had gotten in trouble for drunk driving. So a lot of people created T-shirts with the mayor drunk on the front of it for homecoming, right? We really couldn't push those ones, even though we knew those would sell. So that was that. And then she then got a grant to create, it was very unique for, especially Minnesota, it was a class where we teamed up with engineers from another school on the Iron Range in northern Minnesota. And they had some business ideas to create with their skills, but they needed the business side of it, right? They were the engineers. So we teamed up with them and traveling back and forth from up north. And kind of essentially the idea, which I think is still kind of great, that they had and that we were testing out was, I don't know if you guys are into hunting at all, but essentially it was automated items based off of GPS that you could take your dog through fields and help their keen skills of tracking through the grass in order to not scare the pheasants up until it was time, right? And then it would automate that process for the dog so that the dog, once he got it within a certain proximity, the alarms would go off and shoot it out, right? Now, obviously, that technology is throughout every industry, but not within the hunting industry. That's kind of fallen behind. So we were testing things like that, coming up with a business plan. And that's kind of what really got me truly excited about, well, yeah, you can start a business from the ground up. You don't have to work for a corporation. So from that, at that point, I started a company called EXP Promotions. And that's what really kicked it off. What I would do, and a lot of people call it concert promotion, but it isn't that, is I would take a artist, rapper, if you will, it was hip hop, and I would take a venue and I would rent out the venue and I would contract out the artist and bring them two together. So it was like, we own the event, we own the concert.
Who's your favorite hip hop artist right now?
My favorite right now, the number one album I'm listening to is Drake right now. But,
okay, Drake Scorpion.
Yeah, but I think, if I go deeper, it's like Macklemore, if you will.
Okay.
Something a little bit more meaning, if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm listening to the Scorpion album a lot right now. I like all types of music though, not just hip hop.
So I have been for so long a public opposer to Drake that I literally can't even bring myself to listen to Scorpion because the snippets I've heard, I've enjoyed, and then I realize it's Drake, and so I have to not listen to it to maintain my status.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah.
Which is a very closed-minded approach to anything.
I'm gonna set up a Bluetooth speaker. I'm gonna set up a Bluetooth speaker in your apartment through wireless and just start playing it at random intervals, just to mess with you.
It's interesting that you talk about the hunting, the first hunting sort of business that you did. I'm not a hunter. My dad and I do a lot of fishing, and I've actually spent some time in Minnesota at the Detroit Lakes fishing, and I see a similar dichotomy in that the fishing space has, in my mind, some room to modernize, and there's some opportunities there from a business perspective in the way that they do things. And the tooling keeps getting better and better. But on that note, I wanted to ask, as you were going through that, and you mentioned this is the first time you kind of opened your eyes and saw you could build something from the ground up. Could you talk more about that experience and what that kind of change in worldview meant to you?
Yeah, I think, and the teacher at that time was Dr. Flannery. So shouts out to her. But, with the t-shirts too, I think the t-shirts was the very first one, but that was anybody could create a t-shirt. But that was the first transaction of here, we created something from the ground up and we got dollars for it. Right. But as far as creating that new product that we could sell out to people on a mass scale, or having that idea and building the business plan around it, it was just the idea of, here's these engineers that created from the ground up of taking this hardware and the software and technologies that are available to create something. And then we're able to create a business around it, right? That was a product. We're able to create the business plan around it. It's like, this is actually viable. And it was like when we started talking to friends and are surveying people, not just friends. And like, that's something I would definitely pay to go do at a driving range or whatever it may be, or at a shooting range. Sorry. That was kind of where I started to click of like, oh yeah, we created this business plan. These guys created this product and there's people willing to pay for it. Right. At that time, we only had about 8 months and the engineers had an opportunity to still move forward with the business. And they chose not to just because of their past in life, right? So that was like the first part of seeing people that you had no clue who they were saying, yes, I would pay to do something like that.
Before you started EXP, what was your assumed post-college path that you thought you might follow?
It was the path I was still following, even with EXP, was get a job within marketing, try to pay my own bills. Well, even though I grew up in a poor family, so just try to push as hard as you can and try to exceed with the resources that I had, right? So it was, try to find a job, and it wasn't even like how do we find a great job. It was how do we find a job within my industry and continue to excel in. Fortunately, I was able to find a job right away out of college and grow from there.
So let me just clarify there. EXP was your first job out of college, or it was your first side hustle out of college, and you also had a job?
Yeah, so let's back into that. That started in my junior year of college, into senior year, so the junior summer, and right away, and it was an artist you guys probably know is Big Sean. I had some money from working, all my savings, and I had this artist, and I happened to, through a friend or something, know his agent, right? So I told his agent that we had this great venue downtown Minneapolis that we could throw this concert at. And he had just started going on tour. And this was during the stage where YouTube just started blowing up for independent artists. And you didn't need like a Live Nation or any type of contract management group to go on tour anymore because you had your fans yourself. So I told the agent we had this place, and I told the venue that we had Big Sean ready to go, and we had none of it. And we just kind of had to fake it till we make it, and it kind of came together. And it was like, all right. And I was like, well, I have most of the funds. And we went to a friend, like, we need some more to get it done. Like, they're saying yes. Like, we have to do this now. So we pulled together all the contracts signed. I mean, I pulled up contracts. I think it was like off of like, I don't know what it is, like rocket.com or whatever like that, right? Created up these contracts from Google. And then we put on the first concert and we started promoting it, and sales were going great. But about a week before, and majority of the sales will happen like 3 days before, but a week before, sales were all right. We weren't necessarily break even. It's kind of nervous. And then his first song, My Last, hit the radio. And then the concert just sold out. So that was absolutely perfect timing. It was amazing. And for the dollar that we invested in the concert beforehand, because the single wasn't out yet, was a lot less. So it was great. From there, we did our next concert with a group called Time Flies, and that sold out in 4 days. And nice. So that was crazy. We had like a 300-person room, because it was the first time they went on tour. 300-person room, sold that out in like 24 hours. And we went up to like a 1,900-person room, and that sold out in 4 days. Wow. So we were like, whoa, this is awesome. Okay. And then we did like Kid Ink, and then Mike Stud. Mike Stud is still underground, if you will, but we were bringing people that we just liked, right? That we knew we liked, and hopefully everyone else did. And so with Mike Stud, we had an opportunity to do more shows. So we were doing like 5 to 6 shows in the Midwest. And then we did that with Logic. So we brought out Logic, and we did more shows. It started just growing and growing because we knew since we were already bringing them, we could do more in the Midwest. And then we did a national tour with an artist called Somo. Somo is now on the radio national, but not as huge as the other names. But that was our first national tour. I think pulled together around 16 cities for that. So I was still working at Schwann's. So then about halfway through that whole foray, I got my job at Schwann's. And essentially my boss gave me the ultimatum of, you want to continue working at Schwann's, or do you want to do this business? Just because it was conflicting too much. It was getting too big. And at the time, Schwann's was a good paycheck. It was easy, to tell you the truth, right? It was a corporate job and benefits. And my girlfriend, now wife at the time, didn't like the lifestyle of the concert business, if you will. So closed up shop on that side. You know, being naive and dumb, and didn't even realize that there was true value in that business. It was just something that kind of came together, and we were having a great time with friends. You know, possibly could have sold it, done something, but it was just, it was time to close it up. So then continued working at Schwann's, but we could dive into the Schwann store.
What does closing up a business look like, where you have contracts and you have things set up? Did you just finish them out and just say, okay, we're done? Or how does that look?
Yeah, the contracts were for all upcoming work, or work that was going to be executed. So it was all like, we would sign them up for 5 shows, and then we get those 5 shows done. So we did the national tour, the 16 cities, and then I think we had like 1 or 2 concerts ready to go in the Midwest, and we had to finish up those shows, and then it was done after that, right? And we kind of look back, and if we would have been more businessmen at the time, would have been like, well, yeah, how do we sign on all these artists to a full year worth of shows or something like that? Because all of them blew up, basically every single one of them, right? Logic just signed the largest contract in hip hop. Big Sean blew up, Kid Ink blew up, all of them. So it was things that I wish we would have been able to know back then, but we were having fun.
So you move on to focus fully on Schwann's. How long were you at that job before starting Local Crate? And I'm assuming there's probably some things you learned there that led to the formation, but I may be projecting.
No, exactly. I think when we look, well, I'll hop into it here, is that, I joined Schwann's as an internship right out of college. Schwann's they built the area that I lived in, so it was always a great company. Respect Schwann's very much. So did my internship there, and it was great. And then I got hired on as associate marketing manager right away. So it was awesome at that stage, being able to start my life there, and learned a lot. Schwann's is very entrepreneurial in spirit until, I guess, recently, until we decided to leave. It was, you could create an idea, a product, and if you're able to work it through the organization, you can launch it within 3 or 4 months. Now, that's good and bad, right? For a large organization, that's bad because it's going to cause a lot of chaos. But for a smaller entrepreneur or smaller organization, it could do great. I was there for about 3 years. I met my co-founder there. He was the corporate chef of Schwann's, and we would work together on. He would create a gold standard of a product, and I would take it through what we call stage gate in the corporate world, and take the margin out, take the processing out of it, and launch it. Well, you can imagine what that product was from when the culinary person developed it to when we actually launched it, right? And it's very hard to be excited or proud of those items, right? You're excited for the sales and the sales cycle, but not so much the actual product itself. So that's when we started looking at things. So that's kind of where the idea started to spawn out.
Can you tell me about that moment in time where you're starting to spawn the idea of Local Crate and exactly what the first version was?
So I have to be very careful around this side because of Schwann's. But essentially, we speak about it this way, is that Mike and my co-founder parted way with Schwann's, right? At that time, Blue Apron plated. HelloFresh wasn't here yet, but Blue Apron plated, we started hearing ideas about them. So after we left Schwann's, there was a lot of talks of these players, and we hadn't heard anything about them, right? A lot of the food world hadn't. These were all technology guys, our logistics guys. Nobody in food, period. So it was like these guys creating these food businesses. It was like, what's going on here? Completely bypassing the food industry. And I would say it bypassed the food industry until about a year ago, maybe even, right? Until they kind of woke up to it. And it was all technology investors. It wasn't even food investors. And you're starting to see where that knowledge is a problem, if you will. So we looked at it and we said, awesome, here's a way that we could create a gold standard, sell it to a customer, and the customer processes it. So the customer is the manufacturer. So then that product should still be gold standard in their hands because it's the freshest, right? But then we looked at the national players and we said, well, they're taking fresh food and nationally distributing it. You're going to have big problems, right? So essentially they're taking vegetables and meats from all across the United States or even the world and centralizing it, East Coast, West Coast. And then they're shipping it across the nation. And coming from Schwann's, within home service, they have the exact opposite model. They have depots in every single major city. And that is what is like the holy grail right now. Amazon, if they could have depots in every single city, that's what they want. And that's what they're trying to get to, right? But Schwann's can't sell that off. It's a legacy business, and it's all frozen food. So it's utilized for the wrong item. So we said, well, if we were to look at a model like that, where we had regional kitchens and commissary kitchens in every region, well, we could have the freshest product. We could get it to you a lot quicker. We could use 80% less packaging, and it'd be cheaper shipping, right? So we looked at the national players and we said, okay, what's their top 2 costs? Their top 2 costs are shipping and packaging, because they centralize and they have to ship across the nation. And their number one problem is the freshness of the product. Well, people are buying this product because they believe it's the freshest product. So we knew we could beat them out on the distribution side, right? But we couldn't scale as fast. So rightfully so, the national players, they could scale very fast doing that. And that's what technology people want, right? But now you're seeing all the problems that are coming about it because of it, the spoiled product, not being able to control freshness across 2 to 3 days to the consumer's home. People are leaving. It's high cost to get them in the door, and they're not staying that long. So all those issues are coming about. So now it's taken us time to scale up. So that's when we said, we put the business plan together, and the business plan said, yep, this is a go. Mike and I had created a few together, a few different business plans, and they were not worth it. This was one that we said, let's give it a shot. So we put it all in and gave it a shot here.
I think this is a good time for you to kind of explain in your own words. We introduced it in the intro, but explain in your own words Local Crate and how it exists today.
And that's the toughest part that I'm struggling with right now, guys, is how it exists today and where we want to see it, right? So our 10-second pitch is tough for me to get out because of what I want it to be, right? But essentially on this side of the business, or towards the industry or investors, it's Local Crate is decentralizing the food system within a networked system, right? So forget about meal kits. We have created a localized supply chain within food to decentralize the food system. So you look at food for the past 50 years as it's been the traditional ways you centralize the food and centralize manufacturing to gain efficiencies and ship out. Well, you've gained a lot of problems with that too, right? Use of preservatives, all the mileage the product has to ship, unhealthy food, processed food, shelf-stable food that corporations are going after. And then you miss all the fresh product, right? Now, consumers are wanting fresh. Everything's going towards fresh. In order to truly execute that, you need decentralized. You need facilities and hubs in every major region. So that's what we're going after. And where you want sustainable food from every region, why not have the food that's within our area? I think a big problem I had growing up in southwestern Minnesota is we're growing food everywhere around us, but we can just go grab it and cook it. And it's kind of crazy, right? Southwestern Minnesota is a food desert, but we're growing food.
So Dan Barber, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a Michelin star chef. He wrote The Third Plate. He talks about, and I can't remember the exact name of the idea, but it's eat the foods that are local to the region that you're in. Mm-hmm. I think about that in the context of Local Crate and in the context of coming up with dishes that are offered. You can't standardize maybe a menu across the entire nation. You mentioned something about regional kitchens. Do each of the kitchens have different menus for different seasons?
Yes, exactly. So as Mr. Barber states, is regionality, right? The growing region. There's a problem around what people state as local, right? Local still doesn't have a definition. There isn't anything people could point to and say, that's what local is. So let's take a step back so we can dive deeper here, is that the local industry in food is the most highly fragmented industry there is. There isn't a single person that owns more than $50,000 of it, right? It's all independent chefs, independent restaurants, independent co-ops, independent farms, independent makers, right? There isn't a single brand people could point to or platform to say, yes, this is where I gain my local information from or product from, right? And there's so many of them, right? There's so many. The fastest growing industries are the chefs and restaurants, the co-ops, the makers, and everything, right? So that's what we're going after, to try to bring that all together for everybody, right? So now when you look at that, well, local could be like, well, is that from my city? Well, it's kind of hard to source everything from Minneapolis, right? But it's what is from your growing region that you are able to grow here and produce here. So our growing region here in the Midwest, we state as Minnesota, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Iowa. Those 4 states is what comes out of our facility here. Now and that's for the upper Midwest. In California, we launched our facility in San Francisco. That is for California. California has essentially their own growing region, right? Now we'll be launching one in the Northeast for the states above New York, if you will, right? So that's kind of what Mr. Barber gets to, is that there's items that we could grow within a growing region, and there's so many. And with technology now, is that there's hoop houses, vertical farms where we could essentially grow everything. People wonder, well, we've kind of probably launched in the worst state to launch in because we can only grow for 4 months. But yet we have the largest population of co-ops in the United States. We have the largest co-op in the United States. It's like, well, why? But there's so much focus and feel for that local aspect and the do good aspect and hoop houses and vertical farms. We're able to get tomatoes in the middle of winter that are the freshest product you can gain because of these vertical farms. I mean, essentially, that's localized farming at its best in every region.
Could you explain what a co-op is for listeners who may not be familiar with that term?
Yeah, so I guess a co-op could be used across every industry. But so when I stay in our industry, it's a food co-op. Essentially, that there's people that go around trying to get people to invest a certain amount of dollars, and it's say $50 or any amount that you could put into this organization to then build a food store. But then now you're a owner of that organization. And if any profits at the end of the year, you get paid back. Any losses, hopefully the organization could incur and keep that business going. Minneapolis has one of the oldest and is actually the largest single co-op in the United States. It's called the Wedge. And they're great partners of ours. We actually source ingredients from their distribution center. In order for a lot of these co-ops and restaurants to be locally sourced, they had to create that from the ground up. So there's local supply chains in every city that aren't the big boys. These are built by farmers and chefs. And that's what we're tapping into. They're not by Cisco or US Foods or Aramark, these mass sourced items. These are built from the ground up, every major city now.
So I want to get back to Local Crate real quick. Why meal kits? Why is that the place to start when this regionality is so important?
Can I piggyback on that? If this makes more sense to answer first, you mentioned that there was a larger what you wanted it to be, so it's hard for you to put in a 10-second pitch.
Yeah, so we'll tap into both here. Is that meal kits is what got us excited about it. Oh, actually, so we said the regionality of regional kitchens for distribution to make the freshest food possible, to ship the freshest food. Well, then at that time we said the fastest growing trend in the food industry was local. So it's like, well, now we could source locally because we have kitchens in every region. And then that's what clicked and said, okay, now we can launch. We know we could win within those regions. So then meal kits was the fastest growing food trend in food. And that's what got us excited because the freshest food. And then local got us excited. And then we launched that and it grew great here in the Midwest. It was hard to get funding. It still is for meal kits, right? Nobody wants to hear meal kits until they hear our pitch and then they're like, oh, you're completely different on the back end. The front end's the same, but everything else is different. So we were able to get some funding with that and continue to grow. Now, meal kits within retail are as hot as possible. That is, you're not even dealing with the buyers, you're dealing with VPs or above, right? Because they need the solution. They need something. And there isn't a generally distributed meal kit on the market today. And that's what we are. Yes, we are in Target, but we're also distributed through distribution centers to other stores. So the larger picture is that we created that localized supply chain that can be utilized for selling anything local. We have the connections with the farmers, with the chefs, the makers, the distribution of that product, the stories and the content and how to tell it. With that, we're able to create a new type of product, or we could say marketplace if you want to at this point, that focuses on localization. So how do we get consumers the freshest product possible and that has the biggest story as possible? Consumers have been asking for the story of their food for the past 30 years. National food can't do it, period. So you need to be within the region. You need to have that. And the beauty of it is people are talking blockchain within the supply system. You don't need blockchain if you know where your food's coming from, right? We are going to be implementing that blockchain aspect within to drive transparency from the farm to the consumer, but it's essentially 2 blocks, if you will, right? So that's what we're trying to go after, and we're very excited to do if that all pulls together and makes sense.
Can you give me another example of if you have this infrastructure to be the local supplier in these different regions? Besides the meal kits, what else may you be distributing in those localized regions?
Yeah, so what's the favorite bakery where you guys are from?
Laughlin's.
Laughlin's? Okay. In Minnesota, it's patisserie 46, right? But Laughlin's, what's your favorite item from there?
I don't have a whole lot of carbs in my diet, I'll be honest. We'll say baguettes.
Okay, baguettes. You're only able to buy that item at Laughlin's, most likely, right? Well, we'll start shipping that item to everybody. So items that are local, that are favorites of the area, that you can't just go buy at a grocery store, and that's 90% of the items or more. Yes, grocery stores are starting to catch on to the local aspect, even co-ops, but they're only able to carry so many items, and you have to live next to them and they're able to gather that item. Next thing is craft beer. If you want that craft beer, you have to go to the brewery or you have to go to a liquor store that actually carries it. And that only reaches 10, 15% of the population in your state or your region. We can start shipping all those specialty items, and we don't like to call it artisan or specialty, because that's how these industries have been built before, and they've been bought and now they're gone, right? It's the localized ones that we're able to tell the story about. Does that help?
So I have some questions on, I have a couple questions. One of them is on scalability, and
yeah,
I might be a little off on this story and the way it was developed, but I think I remember reading that Whole Foods kind of started with a similar model in that every store only sourced from something within 100 miles. That was kind of their original structure. Now Whole Foods has these manufacturing centers and they're developing their 365 brand, and now they're owned by Amazon, so they're national and probably soon to be super international. But they had to centralize to do that. Does that model resonate with Local Crate, or is there a way to scale and still be decentralized?
Definitely. I think it's a product of the time. You look at Whole Foods, and that's brick and mortar retail. In order to gain as many sales as you can in one location, you need to offer that consumer as many products as you can. Online, you're able to offer curated specific items to a huge group of consumers that are interested in that, in the message that you're selling them. And there is now we believe, locals on the tipping edge of the trend. You're starting to see people really dabble in this area of investment, and we want to be the first people to tell that story. There's other companies, for instance, called Here, Here. They're taking products, ingredients from every region, creating products from them and selling them on the shelf. You have a company out on the West Coast called Good Eggs, massive company, starting to dive into the localized sourcing. So yes, there with technology and the distribution, it's actually cheaper for us to ship same day delivery compared to Blue Apron or plated shipping, about 60% cheaper, right?
Why is that?
Because they're shipping 2 to 3 days from a centralized location, right? Transportation of food is becoming more and more expensive across the United States. You have a job force that doesn't want to drive anymore, millennials. You have gas prices, everything just is diving deep into that to where it's becoming expensive to source nationally, if you will. We're able to source some ingredients at the exact same price as the national product.
I have a question on stickiness. You mentioned earlier that the customer is more likely to stay around, and you mentioned that for Blue Apron, they had these large acquisition costs that weren't being bore out because of spoiled foods. You mentioned a couple other reasons. What kind of data do you have to back up the claim that Local Crate stickiness makes up for maybe the nationalized model and makes more sense?
Yeah, I guess within our numbers, if you will. So specifically on the subscription side, right, is that let's back up. So within month 2, we still retain 66% of our customers. And then at month 6, we retain 33% of our customers. And then it levels off at around 20% after month 10. And then we still retain 20% of our customers for as long as we know. The beautiful thing about our products is we're able to tell a new story to our customers, meaning we bring on new farmers, new makers, and new chefs, right? Chefs are a specific area that we haven't tapped into yet in this conversation, but we're able to tell, for instance, we always say Gavin Kaysen here in Minnesota. It's kind of our chef we always point to. Once we bring him on the menu, all our old subscribers are like, yes, I want to create his meal. They come back on and they stay on average for another 2.5 months. So that's different from original subscription businesses across the board in any industry, is that usually it's a product that's the same thing over and over and over, maybe some updates to it. but you're not really able to tell a reoccurring story that often. So that retention piece, we're able to keep customers longer, and our lifetime value. After 6 months, our customers spending $998 with us, and our customer acquisition cost is around, depending on the channel, $47 to $63. So our lifetime value is and CAC ratio is great.
You mentioned when you add a new chef that adds 2.5 months of additional services. Do you have the same numbers for other farmers, or that's a really unique stat that I haven't heard before?
Yeah, we haven't really focused on the farmers and makers that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
What we realize with our chefs is that that's what brings consumers on board. That's what gets them excited. One thing about localization or local that we thought before was that what people are buying local for was to give back to the community and the caring aspect, right? But that isn't what they're buying local for. They're buying, what are they getting at a local first as a consumer? And it's the experience, it's the story and knowing where their food comes from. And then on the back end, they feel great that they're giving back, right? And helping their community. So the chef, the excitement part of that journey and learning the story about the chef and being able to cook their item and get a video of them showing you how to do it is the exciting piece that gets you in the door. So we acquire that way. And then that's the very first time we get you in the door. Then say maybe 3 months later, you stop. And then a month after that, we have this new chef. You come back on board to try the chef, and you're ordering at least 2 times each month after that for 2.5 months. Right. So that's the way of telling that new story, getting you re-excited, back into the product, re-engaged.
When you say you're ordering, does that mean that each week you have to make an active, conscious decision to order, or is this a subscription service that acts in the background and it's opt-out?
Yes, opt-out, so auto rollover, if you will.
Okay.
Right, there's no true commitment, and then you would opt out after that. Pause, skip, or cancel.
So Frank, you're going 2 routes simultaneously. You're trying to be a ubiquitous retail option and also doing the direct to consumer. If your customer acquisition to lifetime value ratio is so good on the direct to consumer, why not put all your resources behind that?
So it's a tough market for, you have all these, you have Blue Apron, you have Plated, HelloFresh, Sunbasket, Home Chef pushing on that side, right? On retail, you have Chef in a certain amount of stores. You have Blue Apron in 18 stores today in Costco, right? You have HelloFresh now in about 600 on the East Coast, but that just happened. The consumer with our product on shelf, sitting right next to HelloFresh and Chef, this was actually tested in a major retailer, is that they gravitate to local like that. We're at the same price point. The consumer is able to look at it side by side and say, of course, yeah, the same price, I want local, right? Whereas online, we have to go out and fight for those customers and pull those customers in. We would love to be able to have the funding to pour all the dollars on that $47 customer acquisition cost, but we don't have that funding today. We've had some to prove it out, but now the retail's there, and it's a flip of the switch from the standpoint of the dollars we have to spend to get into those retailers are a lot less than spending on the other side. The secret sauce is, well, how do we get those people to become direct-to-consumer retailer subscribers? This omni-channel model is very interesting within food. You look at every other food company, they're a traditional CPG company. Omni-channel is where food is going, obviously, with Amazon and Whole Foods acquisition, and then you're starting to see everyone else add on the delivery piece. It's how do we offer local at where the consumer wants it, how they want it, and what they want, right? So it isn't just direct to consumer. It could be retail, on-demand delivery. At any point, how can we be their local supplier?
Are you able, so you said in that study where they matched you against HelloFresh and Chef at the same price, they chose local. Are you able to match the price dollar for dollar in the stores? And are you also able to do that in the direct to consumer?
Yeah, so in stores, we have been able to match dollar for dollar. Actually, our new offering is going to be ranging from $14.99 up to $19.99. Now, on direct to consumer, we haven't. And I think that was just we're 50 cents more than HelloFresh, right? There's a little more elasticity online compared to on shelf, right? Online, the consumer sees your product, your pricing. On shelf, they're able to compare right in front of their faces, right? It's right in front of them. So that's where we felt, since we don't have that large brand recognition, we don't have the marketing dollars. It's how do we utilize the national players to drive people to the shelf, and then pick local, right? And that's the only barrier is why not?
Is your margin in retail higher or lower or the same as direct to consumer?
It is lower than direct to consumer. Direct to consumer rate, we own the whole process, so it's a lot less. In retail, you have to give a certain amount to that retailer that's helping you sell it, right? That's kind of the big thing there, and I think that's why the national players do. I mean, direct to consumer, capture that market, and then retail. I mean, when you look at the direct to consumer market, Blue Apron was able to grow to a $3 billion valuation in 3 years. Retail would be a 20th of that. The amount of people you're able to sell online is just a lot bigger than retailers.
So speaking of the amount of people, how long have you been active in your upper Midwest region?
Yeah, we launched in November 2015 with our direct consumer product.
And how many monthly active users do you have now?
That's the number we can't talk about.
No
Wish we could today, but yeah. Yeah, we launched in November 2015. We can talk about some revenue numbers because those are out there. But our first year in business, we did $450,000 with just my co-founder and I, and just in the state, or just in Minneapolis, St. Paul. The second year, we did around $800,000. Again, no true investment for marketing or anything like that, with just 3 people. And then we got into the Techstars program, and that really helped in that marketing side, some marketing dollars. We doubled revenue in those first couple months with Techstars, and then we were able to go out for our seed funding. And that allowed us to develop this retail product in the Techstars program. And then now that we launched retail about a month and a half ago now, and we doubled our tripled our monthly recurring revenue in that first month.
Very cool.
Was the retail product part of the pitch to get into Techstars, or was that developed in Techstars?
It was developed in Techstars. We obviously, they kind of saw that in the background as an opportunity. We had been pitched to do a retail product with some smaller retailers, but it wasn't worth the squeeze because you essentially have to create a whole new business. Even though it's a similar product, it's a whole new business. And it just kind of wasn't worth it compared to the opportunity on direct to consumer. Well, when Target's there, that opportunity is worth it. And with their mentorship and the help on that side, Target's been a great mentor, if you will, for us and helping us grow and developing a product to put on their shelves.
You've mentioned throughout this interview that fundraising has been a challenge. Can you is that a fair categorization?
Yeah.
Can you talk to some of the feedback you've gotten? Why it's been a challenge?
Yeah, well, and we could put in a challenge of Midwest people, East Coast people, West Coast people, right? Mm-hmm. And this is our understanding, this is our opinion, and this is what we see, right? Is that West Coast doesn't even want to talk about meal kits, right? So the conversation isn't a conversation. It's a meal kit company. No, that's old, right? We don't want to talk about that. Midwest is, you're a meal kit company. Yeah, kind of. That's tough. We've invested maybe in 1 or 2, some funds, but we're willing to listen, right? So we have the conversations, but then all the metrics are out there. Every number possible that you have to compare yourself to, right? Whereas if you're in a new industry, there's nothing to compare yourself to, right? So the valuations are high, the numbers are high whatsoever, right? But there's numbers for us to compare against too. So it's a lot of diving deep into the weeds and a bunch of details. So that's been tough, but when people wrap their minds around the localization piece and not meal kits, those are the people that can see the future of what we want to do and are bought in, right? We have the people we've been able to attract are amazing, have been absolutely amazing. We're very, very fortunate, and they're great people too. East Coast can be very CPG focused, right? And at that time, we didn't have a product that was actually on shelf. I mean, think about it. If I came to you guys and said, yeah, we're going to launch a product with Target here in a month, right? It's like, what do you mean? You don't even have a product that's on retail shelves. Why is Target going to put you on shelf? Type of thing. Now that we're on shelf and we're actually doing a small bridge financing here, it's a lot easier. And CPG is very straightforward where, yeah, you're local, they're not. We get it, right? You could win at shelf, those type of things. So yeah, that's kind of been the big thing. And another thing with us, as you kind of mentioned, is scalability. When for Intel, literally is like a flip of a switch. About 2 months ago, even investors were still saying, you can't scale local. What do you mean? Right? It was, well, prove out another location and we'll be interested. Right? It's local means non-scale, essentially. But we proved out the California location with all the Target stores out there. It's like now it's not even brought up anymore. Right? It's like, oh yeah, okay, I get it. You could scale local. Right? So that's kind of the big things.
So it seems like you probably have big cost drivers. If you wanted to go direct to consumer, you would have to get a lot of capital, pour it into marketing. To scale local with the retail locations, what does that look like, and what do you need to have go right for you to do that?
Yeah. So big things is a facility, right? But so we work at a commissary kitchens, our food producing kitchens, if you will. But we're essentially repackers. We source ingredients locally, repack those ingredients into our kit, and put it on shelf. So they're essentially distribution centers, if you want to call them that way. So that's relatively easy. People understand you could scale distribution centers, right? Now, the part that people get hung up on is the localization supply chain, sourcing those ingredients. A lot of people don't realize that there's supply chains in every major city that we could tap into. It's just building those relationships and doing that. So we've been able to prove that on the West Coast and already have those implemented in the new regions that we want to go to. So it's the facility, it's the sourcing aspect, and then it's the chefs. And the chefs are a little more difficult. You need to find a connector, if you will, somebody in that region that has those relationships. At the very beginning, it was difficult. Now, every chef has a chef friend, and it's a community, right? And let me back up. This local is a community. So once you tap into that community, it all connects, right? That's where that network comes into play. Think of Etsy. There's this community of makers, chefs, sellers, everything. They're all connected, not from national players. They're connected at the ground up. I tend to go off in different areas here, guys, but I think I'm answering the original question. And then it's finding the retailer. We have to have retailers in those areas to sell to. So it's our plan is going out to these new regions, finding the facilities. So we've got every new region that we're looking at, the next couple regions, if you will. We've already found the facilities, already identified the supply chains. It's now finding the retailers to sell through. The costs are relatively minimal because it's all turnkey items, right? It's fresh food that you're purchasing. It's commissary kitchens that are low leases, and that's how we're expanding.
And those supply chains that you're tapping into, those are variable costs for you then, right? It's monthly leasing fees and things like that. You're not building out facilities.
No, yeah, we are keeping it as lean as possible in order for us to pull levers if needed, right? Say if we don't get a retailer in that area and we're spending money, well, let's cut it out for this time being, right?
This big vision you have of scaling local, if you capture that, how big of a market is that in total? Because you're talking bigger than just the American meal kit size at this point.
Oh, exactly. I mean, the local market today is a $20 billion market. This market is expanding quicker than organic and natural put together. Local has this great marketing perception that it holds true, is that organic and natural is underneath local. Local contains that, right? But you get so much more from local. You're doing good about your community. It's fresher, it's healthier, all these aspects to it. It just needs to be told by the right people. Local kind of is being tossed around today, and it's kind of getting jaded in a way. And we have to get out there and tell that first story. So becoming that first nationally local food company in America, right? And then now we're the first ones to be able to actually say that's what we're becoming because we're opening up in these new regions. And the retail product is what allows us to do that very fast.
Who else is trying to do it?
In different instances, right? You have the Here Food Company, but they're individual products just on retail, not omni-channel. You have Good Eggs, which they haven't stated it, but in their new recent funding of $50 million, you could read between the lines, right? They are, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with them, but for the listeners, they are essentially an online grocery store for the West Coast, just San Francisco today. They tried to scale out, but they were such a huge operation, they weren't able to. Now they will be scaling to LA in 2019, but that's since they're so big and they're an online grocery store to start, and that's what they're scaling, they're only able to go city by city very slowly. Since we're scaling our localized brand through retail, we could scale very quickly and foothold in these markets, learn the markets, and then scale up from there.
Why do you think Good Eggs has been able to raise $50 million?
Well, so Good Eggs is actually, the total they've raised probably about 200 million. They've been a baby of San Francisco. They grew that marketplace, that organic / localized, if you will, but they don't tell the story of the branding very well. They're going towards that way, and that's what are getting investors excited. And then the localized supply chain that they're developing. They tried to expand to, I think, somewhere in Texas, Chicago, and East Coast, but it was way too big, way too complicated. They tried to do it way too quick, and they had to pull all of it back to San Francisco. Kind of hate telling their story right now. But yeah, they had to pull back from San Francisco, and now they focus on San Francisco and hired a new CEO, and now they're starting to expand out. But it's going to be a slow movement.
So you're tackling a hard, complex, large problem. Who do you look for or look to in terms of inspiration? So that could be someone you don't know, like a business leader or someone who's done something similar in the past, or for mentorship, so someone you do know. How are you utilizing those kind of people?
Yeah, investors are a big one for us, right? So first, I'd say internally, our employees, we truly believe if you're doing something good, you're going to attract good people, right? We have been able to attract phenomenal talent. We believe because we're doing something that people are genuinely interested in and want to be a part of, right? So like our VP of operations that came on board was scaled up another delivery company and went into larger distribution facilities. Our CMO, she was at General Mills, started a company called Red Stamp, sold that, and then was the CMO of Bright Health, which is the largest fundraising company in the year in the Midwest. Right, they raised 160 million their first time, so we got her on board. So first, internally, the talent that we're bringing on, or our growth managers, insane. But anyways, internally, and then after that, it's our investors, people that were mentors that have came on to be investors. These people are either one, very deeply tied into the food industry or the tech industry. And it's balancing ourselves out around, we don't want just traditional food because it's going to point us in one direction. We want to balance that out with tech and new food people. How do we look at things from a different scope? And then, yeah, we have mentors too, and just trying to tap into every knowledge piece that we can.
How big is your team in total, Frank?
We have 13 salaried. We have about 50 employees right now.
Okay. Tying back to, you mentioned earlier that Minnesota is kind of a food desert, so it was not necessarily the best place to launch the business.
Maybe a food tundra.
A food tundra. So why are you still based in St. Paul now? Is there a better place for local crate?
Yeah, no, I think, so I want to step back because we're talking about the home area here, right? Is that there's certain parts of Minnesota that are a food desert, right? When it should be flourishing with amazing items. But that's just the business model that they're in today. Is you look at Minnesota and that's what your first thoughts are, right? But again, they have the largest amount of co-ops in the United States. It isn't easy to grow year round here, but you're seeing the food community flourish. Minnesota should be the food capital of the United States. You look at all the players, you have General Mills, Land O'Lakes, Schwann's, all the other corporations. The food entrepreneurial scene is starting to pop up, but the food capital is Boulder, Colorado. Why? Like that, there's no specific reason why they should be. Minnesota should be. And we're starting to go after that. And you're starting to see these new food companies come up. So we're very excited to continue to be based here. Yes, we can source better in California year round, but local isn't about sourcing. Local is about a piece of it sourcing, but it's about the story. It's about the chefs. It's about the makers. It's about pulling that whole story together and the ideas of looking at food in a different way. And I think Minnesota has that talent in order for us to look at it in a different way.
So you used to hang out with rappers, and now you hang out with farmers. Is your girlfriend okay with you hanging out with, or your wife hanging out with seedy people now?
Seedy people, yeah, there you go.
What a pun. Been sitting on it the whole interview.
Yeah.
You got to give me my dad joke of the day, you know?
Yeah, I'm actually glad you brought that up. Is that piece we didn't touch on is, went from essentially selling an true experience with concerts to food. But when you look at local creators, what we're trying to do is sell an experience with food, right? So it's bringing both of, I guess, those passions together of we're trying to create an experience for our customers by telling the story and all these different aspects. And then it's a great food company. So trying to pull those two together has been, I think, what is unique about us. We're not tech people. We have some great people on board that are now tech, but we're food people at heart. And I think you could see that with our product. You're buying a food product. The national players, the top largest costs are shipping and packaging because of their distribution, their scalability. So you're buying shipping and packaging and then food. With us, our top cost is food. So you're buying food from us.
Frank, so much for being on the show. If two questions. What markets are people able to order Local Crate now? If our listeners are there.
Yeah, so our delivery is in Minnesota and Illinois, and then California. To buy it on shelf, we have Minnesota, a little bit of Wisconsin, and it will start expanding here very shortly in the Midwest, and then California and Arizona.
And so after the show, if listeners are interested in learning more, or if they're in those areas, where can they learn more about Local Crate or follow you online?
Yeah, so localcrate.com or at Local Crate on any social media platform available, and then at Local Crate West for the West Coast.
Great. Frank, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
All right, Eric, we just talked with Frank Jackman, the co-founder and CEO of Local Crate. Remind our listeners what we're about to do in my favorite part of our episode here, the third segment of our show.
Well, first, Jay, I just want to say thank you very much for being here in the Deal Memo episode.
That was an accident.
Part of the episode.
That was an accident. I didn't even realize I did it until you told me.
Listeners, if you didn't hear, at the end of the episode, Jay tried to say, Frank, thank you very much for joining the episode. And he said, Frank, thank you very much for the join.
I'm all about the economy of language.
Yeah, that was a portmanteau to its finest. The third section of our podcast, to get back on track here, is a verbal hypothetical deal memo. What Jay and I do here is we assume we are in charge of either an angel fund or a venture capital fund, and we're looking at this opportunity that you guys have just heard about, and we're going to say, what's the upside? What's the downside? The point is twofold. First, to communicate to our potential investors, in this case hypothetical, why we're putting money behind this opportunity and this idea. The second is so that Jay and I can look back in 6, 18 months and say, why did we decide to invest in this idea or pass on this idea, and crystallize our thinking.
That's right. And it's my favorite part of the show because this is where I get my learning. This is where I become smarter and where you and I really sharpen our axe. And also, this is where we want to hear from you, our listeners. So if you have thoughts throughout this deal memo, please tweet at us at UpsideFM or comment on this episode on Breaker and let us know what you're thinking. Let us know what we missed. Let us know why we're wrong. Let us know why we're right. That sounds amazing. But yeah, this is where we are really accomplishing one of our main goals of this podcast, which is to learn and get better at this.
So Jay, we just talked with Frank from Local Crate. I'm going to be the first to say it. I came into this interview a little, how did you phrase it? Intense? I was
dubious.
A little intense. Ooh, I was dubious. I was, you know what? If we're going to lay it out there, I was negative. I was downright negative. I came in with a skeptical mind, and I think I was proven wrong. But Jay, you came in with a little bit more positivity. What did you take away from this interview? What were your big takeaways?
Well, I think we're starting to see a pattern here when we think, oh, this seems familiar and we've seen this before. that's also some feedback that this founder has probably heard 1,000 times, and they've got a different spin on it. So, being open-minded. But what I took away from this is a novel approach to what is no longer a novel general idea, right? Similar to our ParkX episode, I like this decentralization of local, and I like some of the promise here. That doesn't make it an easier market, which, we came into this saying this is a tough market with two major players that are both publicly traded companies, neither of which are profitable in a market that's $4 billion. But from talking to Frank, his play and his perspective is that he is going to expand that market to get out of just the $4 billion meal kit market, because expanding it both in retailers and potentially in the goods that he is distributing from his decentralized local depots. What was your main level takeaway?
Well, I think it was twofold. The first one is kind of summarizing what you said, which is, and I guess extrapolating a bit, and Local Crate is not just selling a meal kit, they are selling the experience of food. He mentioned the idea of the story of the food, the benefits from having a chef on, the benefits from having the makers and the farmers and telling their stories and linking to all of that. And I think that when you can connect with people in that level, when you can really share a story, that's just like human nature. We feel that a little bit more. And the second thing, and probably actually the thing that stood out to me most, was I asked a question about mentors and specifically inspiration. And his first answer was his employees. And I know that this is a very kind of soft skills type of feel, but that answer, when you have the opportunity, and most founders would say, oh, I look to Jeff Bezos, or I look to Bill Gates, or I look to this random guy who worked in my industry 40 years ago who did a great job. His first answer was, no, I look to the people in my building who come on board and are creative geniuses in their own right and are developing the future. I like that is like leadership that I don't think you see very often.
Yeah, I like that. I like that paired with Frank's general humility throughout the interview. It does seem like his team has some real bona fides, some bona fides, some good track record. Also, I love a good story, and being able to see the through line of the Schwann's effect on his city, his family, his life, and now his business. Very interesting. The line that really stuck out to me was, or maybe, a couple lines here, when he was talking about the Blue Aprons, the HelloFreshes of the world, these original meal kit services did not come from the food industry. As you said, with the experience of the food, if they make genuinely a better product, something that people experience and enjoy more because they're coming at it from a food perspective and they're coming at it from a local, fresh perspective, I think that sounds like opportunity. Now, some shadows, if we will.
Ooh. You want to remind the listeners what a shadow is? Not the full story, just the idea.
Shadows is shorthand for a story Eric shared about being on a surfboard and seeing a shadow in the water and thinking it might be a shark, but it turned out to be a turtle. Sometimes shadows are sharks, sometimes they're turtles. We don't know, but they're shadows nonetheless. Shadow that I'm thinking about here, let's just say that the world doesn't necessarily play out to expanding the pie, getting out of just meal kit, which is directly opposed to his thesis. So maybe we shouldn't assume this, but if we're looking at how low could this go, and it doesn't expand, still highly competitive, still not price matching on those direct-to-consumer meal kits. His cost of acquisition and lifetime value sounds good, but if the investors who can see the financials, because they're fully public from these companies, are doing the math, much more involved math than we have done today, back on the napkin, and having some trouble with it, that's a shadow to me. But I think if you're going to look at this opportunity as a real opportunity, you got to believe in the full story that Frank is spelling out with retail locations and just general decentralization of this.
So the biggest risk for me on my side is really user behavior. I think it's fundamentally hard to cook meals every single day or to cook meals all the time. And the margins that they bring in their direct to consumer side of the business, those are definitely going to buoy their business into the future. The retail is a beautiful risk mitigating strategy. It hits on a lot of user behaviors that are already present in the market. You walk into the store, you buy your food, you say, oh, here's a meal kit. We'll make that on Wednesday. Perfect. My question is more around the idea that we need to convert that experience into a user. And this might come from my ignorance on the product side of things, but we need to convert that experience into this idea of someone signing up 2 weeks out of the month, every month, to committing to cook dinner, because humans aren't that good at habits. Good habits, I should say. What would be more interesting to me is some sort of, and I know I'm hypothecating here, but something where I have a set number that I get to use per month, where I can either go into the store, order it directly, however it works, and by signing up for a monthly subscription, I get X number of meals for the month. That to me makes a little bit more sense. I've always thought that this idea, I've used Blue Apron, I've used HelloFresh, and getting 4 meals for a week is a lot of cooking to do. It's just difficult.
That's true. I think to play devil's advocate a little bit, I think they sell in 2 meal servings because they can deliver much more quickly.
Well, there is something that I completely missed.
And also, if they're going the retail route, which we kind of have to assume that's the path forward. If not, the proposition is they're going to have to outspend on marketing and out acquire the big boys with a price point that doesn't match them. And if he's struggled in fundraising on that value proposition, I just don't think that happens. I think we have to look at this as retail or bust. And another shadow there would be if he can't become ubiquitous in retail outside of the Target locations. If you have Costco that says we're going exclusively Blue Apron, or we have Walmart saying we're white labeling it, or even if they start in all of those chains and then all those chains say, actually, we're just going to work with a co-packer and white label our own, that's a risk.
And there's also the risk that there's all of this consolidation right now, which means that, okay, let's put ourselves in the position of, who did we just say bought someone? Albertsons bought Plated, I believe.
Yeah.
So you're Albertsons. You are the COO or the CEO, and you just approved this acquisition of a $300 million meal kit service. And this other meal kit comes to you and says, hey, we're going to guarantee you 20% margin, but we're going to compete directly with your new purchase. That is a tough value proposition to say, okay, now we want to get into every store. I don't think that's the route. I think the consolidation really has made that tough for local crate. I think that is probably a risk in that they only have a select few number of grocery stores or convenience stores or whatever that they can actually get into because of this recent kind of buying spree, if you will.
They're also competing with potentially Fresh Eggs, the name of the company that he mentioned.
Good Eggs?
Good Eggs.
I believe.
Good Eggs. Highly capitalized. But also, these could be seen on the other side of the coin as opportunities, this consolidation. What if they move quickly enough and have the chefs aligned? So maybe that's a valuable asset. Maybe the depots in their different locations are valuable assets. And they are acquired by either another meal kit service or a chain a la Albertsons and Plated. Could be opportunities. Could see that as an exit opportunity.
Let's do a little bit of digging into Jay and Jay's eating habits. This will be fun for everyone.
No.
So, Jay, you do not make meal kits. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. You eat wasabi peas, and that's about it from what I went to the grocery store with you. Is that correct?
More or less. I eat a lot of low preparation, easy to do things. That being said, I have certainly considered meal kits. Where I fall apart is exactly what you said. I don't trust my own behavior that I can make good on 4 meals a week at a price point of $10 to $12 per meal. I don't trust myself to do that. I think there's going to be a lot of waste. And then, that's kind of a high price point in my mind.
So let's say that you decide that 2 meals a week is sustainable. Let's put Jay in this future state. And then all of a sudden you decide it's not. Now, you have been a user of Local Crate, and then someone like Cameron Mitchell, who is a celebrity chef in Columbus, comes out with some recipes and says, look, these are the recipes that I would make this summer using ingredients that are made here in Ohio. Is that something that motivates you, or are you just, nah, you're not the core consumer here?
I don't think I'm the core consumer. I do think that the difference of 2 meals versus 4 meals as a way to try it moves the lever. I also want to say, love Cameron Mitchell restaurants. Let's not give him credit as a chef here. He's a restaurateur.
Wow.
Wow. On blast.
Wow. Cameron, don't listen to this because we will definitely have you on the podcast sometime. That'd be great.
Yeah, I don't know chefs well enough. However, I think there are a lot of people my age or like me who are watching the Great British Bake Off, who are watching Chopped, who are watching Iron Chef America, who love that and would geek out on that. And so I believe that that may be the core consumer, but it's not me.
Great. Well, a couple other things I wanted to mention in terms of what I'm really excited about in this business. Obviously, the stories, I think that there is a huge market that you just mentioned, the people who watch all of those shows, the people who are going in their Yelp Elite and they check out all these restaurants and they know all the chefs in the area. That's something I could definitely see people getting behind and getting excited about and posting on Instagram and talking about on Twitter. Is this chef's recipe for this specific time? There's scarcity that's involved. That's all really interesting to me. The other thing that is really interesting to me is just some of the numbers. The most exciting number to me in this space is stickiness and retention. Frank said that Local Crate has 66% of people renewing for month 2. In month 6, 33%. That means if 3 people sign up for Local Crate, 6 months later, 1 person is still signed up. Now let's look at Blue Apron, who is the perennial all-star in this space. Not profitable, but the perennial all-star. That 6-month number is 10%. That means you have to sign up 10 people to get 1 person to stay for 6 months. That is like that number differential is incredible to me.
Hi, it's me, the devil's advocate. I think that I agree with you. My question is, would that number bear out at a level of scale comparable to Blue Aprons? Or are they saturating the market to a customer that is not as loyal, and that's just kind of what would happen at that level of scale?
That's a great point, and that probably gets us to where we want to end this, which is the market sizing. Let's assume that this is... I mean, how would you even go about categorizing the market sizing here?
Great question. If I would have had a little bit more time and done a little bit more research, I would have looked into retail location stats and tried to figure out some sort of proxy for what they're selling in meal kits or Hungry Man dinners. I'm not sure. It's hard. Because if you're looking just at meal kits, $4 billion, HelloFresh and Blue Apron have 35% of that. So you're looking somewhere $1.4 billion a piece. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have an approach?
I think I would use something similar. I also think that there's a lot of macroeconomic factors here. There is some pretty, and I like my macroeconomic trends. There are some pretty significant dives and growth in eating out versus eating in times of bull markets and bear markets. And for those who aren't aware or don't pay attention to the financial markets or economy, we have been in a 9-year upswing, which means
it's a big old bull.
It is the either second longest or longest bull of all time in recorded market history. And our economy appears to be humming, which means everyone feels rich. And I haven't looked at the stats. I know what the chart looks like, but I don't have the stats on me. For eating out as an American, it's high. It's very, very high. When a recession hits, that number crashes. It's just the way things have always worked. And I think that when people are going to the store more and they can buy a meal kit more, and that is a more affordable option, they can buy that for $14 and get a high quality, high experience meal that can supplement their current deficit for going out and eating $40 meal somewhere. I think that's maybe a huge catalyst that's hidden in the weeds for them.
True, that's interesting. And it's also another reason why you've got to look at this not from the meal kit standpoint, because subscriptions are going to be one of the first things to cut if the market turns, in my mind. But yeah, I would say if it's in stores and it becomes a meal that you can buy and make fairly hassle-free at an approachable price point, I do think that's a good plus. Something that I did want to touch on, because I feel like we didn't touch on it quite enough, hard enough to quantify the retail opportunity for a prep to meal. He's looking at a world where that's not even the only thing that they're distributing from their decentralized hubs. So that's a whole other thing that I just have no idea how to quantify.
Here's the thing. There are a few things in our lives that we need. One of them is food. The market is huge. That's something we need to know. The market's very big.
Yes. So let's, we've both kind of acknowledged that we see big opportunity here, big opportunity that we're not quite sure how to quantify, that would lead to us asking more questions. But I think it's safe to say that we're interested in this opportunity, interested in learning more. What are you looking for in 6 to 18 months from Local Crate?
I want to see how their metrics in California and what he called the states above New York actually pan out. I think that when you're in your home turf, you understand it so well. When you're in Minnesota and Iowa, and that's where he's from, that's where the founding team's from, you understand it. You understand how people eat. You understand that, they might like these kind of fried foods better, or stereotypical Minnesota, they like mayo, right? That's like their thing, I think. Deep fried mayo on a stick or whatever. Maybe that's Nebraska. I'm sorry, Minnesota. The palate changes a lot in California. That's why I asked the question about, are these menus customized by chefs every season to that culture? And I think that's something that is going to be borne out, and we're going to see some of those stats. And if in Minnesota you have, after 6 months, 33% of people, but in California it's 5%, or in upstate New York it's 80%. Like there's going to be some real questions that come out of the regionality aspect that aren't standardized, that an average isn't just going to work. What about you?
Yeah, I'm looking at, what does growth in retail stores look like? How are the pilots going in California and in Minneapolis? Do they have conversations and traction with other retail locations? This local market, which he ballparked at $20 billion, how are they doing in capturing that? Highly, highly fragmented, as he admitted. Highly fragmented, but I do love the brand Local Crate. I think that speaks well. I also love the brand HelloFresh, because people think fresh. I mean, that's Subway hung their hat on that for so long. What would be powerful to me, if he's working with the Laughlin's bakeries or the craft breweries of the world, do those Hello Crate boxes in their local ecosystems have branding of these local brands that you love? I think that pops off the shelf like crazy. But he didn't mention that, so I'm just I'm just making a wish list here.
Well, I think sometimes what we do in this deal memo is say, man, it would be cool if.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's helpful or hurtful, but I think it is interesting. It shows a little bit about how we're thinking about the opportunity and the idea.
Yeah. So I'm really looking at almost entirely, what does their growth in retail stores look like? I mean, if their direct to consumer tanks, want to know something about that. If it's growing like crazy, want to know something about that. Want to see if other people are buying into his vision of decentralized local, and he's finding some traction in raising capital. But yeah, I think, for me, if this was an opportunity we were looking at, I'm asking more questions sooner rather than later, because I think it is an attractive opportunity.
Okay, well, that wraps it up for us today. We appreciate you swinging by and listening to us chat with Local Crate, hearing our thoughts on the opportunity. We'd love if you connected with us on Upside via Twitter at UpsideFM or hello at upside.fm. If you're a Breaker listener, comment on the episode below. Jay and I respond to every comment on the Breaker app. Jay, what am I missing?
Nothing. We will talk to you guys next week. That's all for this week. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's guest, so shoot us an email at hello@upside.fm or find us on Twitter at UpsideFM. We'll be back here next week at the same time talking to another founder in our quest to find upside outside of Silicon Valley. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please email us or find us on Twitter and let us know. And if you love our show, please leave us a review on iTunes. That goes a long way in helping us spread the word and continue to help bring high-quality guests to the show. Eric and I decided there were a couple things we wanted to share with you at the end of the podcast, and so here we go. Eric Hornung and Jay Klaus are the founding parties of the Upside podcast. At the time of this recording, we do not own equity or other financial interest in the companies which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinion and do not reflect the opinions of Duff & Phelps LLC and its affiliates, Unreal Collective LLC and its affiliates, or any entity which employ us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. We have not considered your specific financial situation nor provided any investment advice on this show. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Never mind. The bro that can't be matched. I'm lighting it on fire. Used to run victory laps, and still I'm not even tired. It's all about the timing, yeah, that's what they say. Well, I'ma keep on rhyming.